Hey there, and welcome back to Utility Sports. We have a really fun one today. Please subscribe if you do like NBA content, as we're going to continue to push this out through the entirety of the season. So, right now, we are going over the top 15 players in the NBA for this upcoming season. Let's start off at number 15. That is going to be Kristaps Porzingis for the Dallas Mavericks. He's a big, he can shoot it, he blocks shots, he's a very underrated defender around the rim. So, Sheldon, why do you got him at 15?
Yeah, and remember here, we're projecting this for this upcoming season. Obviously, Kristaps Porzingis was probably not the 15th best player in the league this past season, but coming off of an ACL injury and hadn't played for 18 months, he put up 20 points a game, around 8 rebounds, was blocking 2 shots a game. And he was shooting 35% from 3. I expect that number to jump up. He shows elite range as a 7'3" big. He can play the 4 or 5 offensively. Defensively, like you mentioned, he's a stout rim protector. He's going to be the anchor for that Mavericks defense moving forward. They've made some strides there out on the wings, and now I think his rim protection is going to be even more valuable as they're going to give up less drives per game. But when they do, he's going to have to be there, and he's going to be a real presence there. Obviously, right now he's going to miss the start of the year, but he's the perfect pairing with Luka Doncic, and I think offensively he's really underrated now at this point. When Luka Doncic was out this past season, he averaged 28 points a game in those games. So offensively, he's a juggernaut, and defensively, he's a really stout rim protector, can move out in space a little bit better than a player like Karl-Anthony Towns, who's an honorable mention on this list. That's why I have him above Towns.
Yep, absolutely. Now moving on to number 14, we have Jayson Tatum, who's really come into his own. He really has a lot in his bag offensively. Why do you have Tatum here at 14?
Yeah, Tatum was hard to rank. I had him as high as 11 at one point, moved him down a little bit, but he's going to be a guy that continues to move forward. If a couple of years from now, he's going to be a top 10 player in the league for sure. He's a guy that has really grown as a shot creator and a shot maker, someone who can get his shot going left and right off the dribble, a guy that can function as an elite catch and shoot option. And he's really grown as a slasher too. I think that's part of the biggest growth in his game, is he can get to the rim. He plays through contact better now. He's continuously getting to the line more and more, something I've been a little harsh on him in the past for. And I think as he continues to make strides, we're going to see him go from a 4 to 5 free throw a night guy to about a 7 or 8 free throw a night guy, which, turns a 20-point per game scorer into a 23, 24-point per game scorer. I think his efficiency is going to continue going up, and I really like what he's been doing for the Boston Celtics, and I think he'll just keep getting better.
Now, number 13, we have Nikola Jokic. Obviously, he was a big part of the playoff series against the Clippers, upsetting them. They were down 3-1. He was a big reason why they came back in the series. The best passing big man of all time, you could argue right now already. Sheldon, why do you got him at 13?
Yeah, arguably he's a top 7 or 8 offensive player in the league, but defensively, that's kind of what his limitation is. That's why I have him down here at 13. We saw him really exceed in the playoffs. He really shined as a pick and pop weapon, a guy who can pass over the post, like you had mentioned, with his passing vision and his ability to put on time and on target passes. The only issue with him is that he gives up 70% of makes at the rim when he's contesting. That's league worst, and it's not even close. I think the second worst center is around 64% make percentage, and he's at 70 make percentage, which is really, really harsh. But other than that, offensively, the guy's a superstar. He's really taking care of his body. I think that was a big part of why he came back and succeeded more in the bubble. And I'm hoping that he comes into the season with that same kind of fitness and willingness to really work on his body to excel his game. I think he could be benefited by getting a little bit stronger, putting on a little bit more muscle. But at this point, 13 is a really good ranking for him.
Next is Joel Embiid, another center on this list. A lot of people would maybe argue that Jokic is ahead of Embiid, but Embiid on the defensive end is superior to Nikola Jokic. Clearly, why do you have Embiid here at 12?
Yeah, I think you nailed it right there with that. Defensively, he's an elite rim protector, a player that, is a stalwart as an anchor, can really lock down a defense. He's an all-defense type of center. And offensively, he's just as much of a threat, in my opinion, as Nikola Jokic. He's a guy who, isn't going to be the passer that Nikola Jokic is, never will be. But you give him the ball in the low block, he's going to hit you with a drop step. He can hit you with a post hook over the middle or over his other shoulder, going to the outside. He can stretch the floor a bit, although I don't like it as much when he does. He's more of a dribble drive penetration threat off the perimeter than Nikola Jokic is. And all around, I think he's the most complete center in the game, if we don't count Anthony Davis as a center. I'm labeling him as a power forward for this. But Embiid is really, really complete player, impacts both ends of the floor. And if Ben Simmons was healthy this past season, we probably would have seen the Sixers put up more of a fight in that first round.
Now at number 11, we have Damian Lillard. Obviously, he's a clutch shooter. He shot from an elite clip beyond the three-point line. It was insane. His deep three-point percentage as well. They had the numbers on that. Pretty staggering. But this guy is a one-man show basically in Portland. Obviously, CJ McCollum's a nice player, but he's the true star in Portland, decided to stay in Portland to bring this team to try to get them to a championship. Why do you have him at 11?
Yeah, we've actually been quite high on Damian Lillard for a while now, way before the bubble, way before any of that. We had a podcast come out about a year ago almost already, talking about Damian Lillard and how great of a shooter he is, and how much of a weapon he is off the dribble. And really, that's why he finds himself here at 11, a player that has pretty much the second best range in the league, right behind Steph Curry, a guy who can hurt you from 35 feet, hurt you from 5 feet. He can get to the rim, can finish over players, has a really good finisher below the rim as well. He has a perfect mix of, getting his teammates involved, to looking for his own shot, somewhat of a streaky shooter, not in a bad way, but when he's hot, he's really, really dangerous. And then sometimes when he's not necessarily hitting, you're kind of questioning his shot selection. That's why he finds himself out of the top 10 for me. But still, the 11th best player in the world is not a harsh ranking, in my opinion. He's a really, really good player. And if they got a superstar wing next to him, I think they'd be one of the front runners for an NBA title. At this point, they haven't done that though. But Lillard is one of the best players in the league for sure.
Now we're looking at Jimmy Butler. For you personally, a big ascension after this last season, because Jimmy Butler put on a show the entire playoffs, and even in the finals, he did well. But looking at Jimmy Butler as a whole, he has just progressed as a player. He's an underrated playmaker. He's a good defender, and he's just a good scorer in general. And even though his three-point percentage won't suggest it, in the playoffs, he was clutch from three. So Sheldon, kind of break down Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, Butler, one of the best two-way wings in the league. I have a real preference for players that play both ends of the floor. I think that's really, really important to me. And Butler is one of the top players in the league at doing so. He's a guy that is capable of playmaking for his teammates, although sometimes I question his pass decision, especially when attacking the rim. I think there's times he could go up and finish, but kicks to the corner. But, overall, he's a willing passer, a player that his teammates should like to play with. He moves the ball around. And like you said, he's really clutch. He's not a good three-point shooter for 3/4 of the game. But the moment the fourth quarter comes around, I'm not scared of him shooting threes if I'm on his team. I'm comfortable with him taking that three-pointer. When the game's on the line, he's a player that's shown it time and time again. And he's an effort guy. He's going to put everything out there for his team. He's going to lock in on defense. He's going to be willing to play off ball defensively, on ball. Whatever you ask him to do, he's going to go out and do it. He's going to bring his lunch pail to work. He's going to bring his hard hat, and he's going to get the job done. And I really like Jimmy Butler. Last year, I would have had him this high, like you had mentioned. This is a big ascension. I would have probably had him 18th or 19th. I thought offensively his limitations were a little too strong, but he showed in this playoffs that he can really overcome some of that in the half court. And at that point now, I have to move him up to 10.
Now, number 9, a lot of people would disagree with this ranking still to this day. Paul George is still inside the top 10, despite people thinking he's one of the worst players in the league all of a sudden after the playoff collapse that the Clippers had. But you think otherwise?
Yeah, I have Paul George here at 9. I know a lot of people aren't going to like it, but this is a guy who averaged over 20 points per game during the season as, the full-time second option. Didn't have the ball in his hands a lot, and that's what he's really best at. I expect Ty Lue to make the adjustments to let Paul George function with the ball in his hands more often, put him in the pick and roll a little bit more, and get him a rhythm. I think rhythm's the most important thing for Paul George. You're looking at a player who Doc Rivers had him spotting up in the corner 50% of possessions basically and running off pin downs. He said this the other day in a podcast with Matt Barnes, and I think he's exactly right. He's a player that should have the ball in his hands, shouldn't be running off screens like a shooter. And I think he's a player that needs to get to the rim a little bit more than he did this past year. And I think a different offensive scheme will help him do so more consistently and play with that rhythm. He's a guy who he's lethal from three. He's lethal in the mid-range. He can handle the rock himself, get to the rim. And he's a really underrated passer, too. He's one of the better playmaking wings in the league, and he's a two-way wing. This is a guy who's been multiple-time all-defense, and I think he's a more consistent offensive player than Jimmy Butler in the half court, especially when he has that rhythm. Like if he was in Jimmy Butler's shoes and was given that offense and be the guy, I think that the Heat offensively would be better. So you're looking at now Paul George at 9. I don't think this is an overrate. I think a lot of people are sleeping on him after this past playoff performance.
The next player is Anthony Davis, which a lot of people also disagree with him being as low as 8. Kind of give some reasons why he's not in your top 5.
Yeah, people aren't going to like this one either. Anthony Davis at 8. I'm sorry, I'm not underrating him. I have him as a top 10 player in the world. This is not anything close to an underrating of a player. He is a really phenomenal two-way player. I have him above Paul George because he's, in my opinion, a more impactful defender, especially he can switch out into space on guards better than any big man in the league can. He's the best big man if you consider 4-5s as both big men. If he played the true center, he'd still be the best center in the league too. And you're looking at a guy who is a pretty strong shooter for a big, a guy that can, function defensively in a lot of different roles. Offensively, he's a little less offensively gifted than some of these other players, if I'm going to be honest. He's a guy who sometimes shrinks in the fourth quarter. We saw it in New Orleans a lot of times. They didn't make the playoffs. And I'm sorry, Drew Holiday's a really good player. AD was there. DeMarcus Cousins was there. Rajon Rondo was there. And they got one series win in the first 7 years of his career. I don't want to fully blame him for that. It's not like that team was stacked or anything, but I think they were good enough to win a couple more series than they did. And I think Anthony Davis not being much of a half-court offensive player with the ball in his hands is really the reason why they didn't. And at 8, for a guy who doesn't, isolate often in the half-court and a guy who can't really consistently get his own bucket with the ball in his hands, he's going to be a guy who gets offensive rebounds and putbacks. He's going to function as a roller in a pick-and-roll game. But outside of that, they don't put the ball in his hand. So at 8, I think that's completely fair analysis.
Number 7, Kevin Durant. Obviously, he's been injured, and now he's coming back off of the Achilles injury. Is he going to be the same player? Is he going to be 90% of what he was? Kind of give a breakdown. What do you think?
Yeah, I have him here at 7. A lot of people were saying top 3, top 2, even top 1 before he got injured. And I still think he's a really phenomenal player. I think his game is one of the better games in the league when it comes to recovering from an Achilles injury. But people don't realize what an Achilles injury does to your first step. He's going to be a slightly less efficient slasher now at this point. And he's also going to be in a situation where he doesn't have the Steph Curry, Klay Thompson shooting around him, something that we saw really benefit his numbers. He didn't become a better player going to Golden State than he was in OKC. He just had a better system around him and more spacing for one-on-one offense. And now in Brooklyn, we're going to see that spacing. He's going to see more doubles consistently. He's going to see a little less airspace off the dribble. And coming off an Achilles injury, I'm expecting him to be about 95 to 90% of the player he was. So it drops him down to 7. It's still top 7 player in the world. That's a really, really high level. There's only 6 players better than him, in my opinion, in the entire world. So again, I'm not trying to underrate him here. I'm expecting a slight, really slight drop off that makes him go from a top 3 player to a top 7 player.
Now looking at his former teammate, Steph Curry, obviously injured all season last year, pretty much. So why is he still at 6 here?
Yeah, I'm just expecting, a broken hand on his non-shooting hand to be something that isn't super, something that doesn't really change the makeup of his game too much. He's still going to be able to get to the rim. He's an elite finisher around the rim. That's something we noticed with all these guys. All these guys can finish at the rim. That's the heart of basketball. If you can score at the rim, that's basically the starting point of what makes a player great. And Curry can do that, but he's also got Superman range. He can shoot from 30 feet out, 35 feet out. He gets his shot off the dribble more consistently than any other player in the entire league. He's a guy who can manipulate pick and rolls. He's an underrated playmaker. Obviously, it's tough now because Klay Thompson is out. That defensively is the reason Curry doesn't find himself higher here, because offensively, he's one of the best weapons in the league for sure. I think he's a little bit too much of a defensive liability from time to time with his size. But offensively, he's insane. I think a lot of people are forgetting how talented he is with the rock in his hands. And we're going to see him now with Oubre, Wiggins, Draymond, and James Wiseman. Not a lot of shooting around him. So the ball's going to be in his hands a lot to create, but I think he's capable of doing so.
Yeah, I think something else interesting to bring up about Steph Curry is, his game is not predicated on athleticism, obviously. So his game out of all the players might age the best going forward as he gets older and progresses into his career. Now we have Giannis Antetokounmpo here at 5. Again, this is somewhat of a controversial ranking because a lot of people think that he's either the best player in the world or second best player in the world. More the consensus, probably the second best player in the world. Tell us, why is he 5?
Yeah, I have him at 5 here. And again, it comes down to half-court offense. This is something that we've seen with the Milwaukee Bucks. This explains their playoff struggles. This is why they felt like they had to go out and get Drew Holiday. This is also why they were targeting Bogdan Bogdanovic. Giannis Antetokounmpo is a slightly less efficient half-court player than some of the guys above him here. You know, his two-way ability is incredible. He's one of the best, if not the best, two-way players in the league. I probably have him as the second best two-way player. He's a guy who can protect the rim as a weak side rim protector. He could be a strong side rim protector, honestly, too. He's a player that can guard out in space when he has to. He's really long-armed, obviously, and a magnificent athlete. One of the scariest players in transition, if not the scariest. Him and LeBron are right there 1-2 when it comes to transition basketball. But I think he just has to refine his skill a little bit more. And I don't even think it necessarily means shooting from the three-point line. I think he's got to work on a face-up game, a little bit of a back-to-the-basket game, give him something a little bit different that teams aren't necessarily used to guarding, because with his passing skill set and his ability to take one step from the three-point line and dunk, basically, he's a freak to guard. And if he just put a little bit more skill into some part of his half-court offense, I think that he'd easily find himself at 2 on my list.
Now, Luka Doncic is here at 4. Obviously, a huge ascension because he's progressed so much, especially in the half-court offense in his game. He has a step back. He's a phenomenal playmaker, arguably the best passer in the league, second best passer in the league, wherever you want to categorize him. But this guy is special, and he could be a top 10 player of all time in both of our opinions.
Yeah, I think Luka Doncic is probably the second best shot creator in the entire league, in my opinion. A guy who can get his shot going right, going left, finishes at the rim at an elite level. That's something that really propelled him this past year. You know, I had him as a top 20 player going into last season. A lot of people didn't agree with me on that. I thought he was better than Kemba Walker. A lot of people I talked to disagreed with me on that. And obviously now it's not even close going into this next season. And I think Luka has a chance to even be possibly number 2 or number 3 going into the following season after this year. He's a player that, like you had mentioned, not only can get his own shot off, create for himself, but he creates for others at an elite level. I do think he's the second best passer in the league, right behind LeBron James. In the half court, I think his passing creativity is almost unmatched. And I think he's also a player that is underrated defensively. A lot of people like to knock his defense, but he's a really competitive defender, cuts people off with his body, doesn't get in foul trouble, which is something key for a superstar. And I have him here at 4 for his all-around game and especially his offensive magnificence.
Now, this is another controversial one. Not a lot of people like James Harden this high. Why do you see him as the third best player in the world?
Yeah, I said that Luka Doncic is the second best shot creator for himself in the entire game, and James Harden's the first. He's a player that he usually scores about 4 times as many points off of self-creation than any other player in the league. If a player like Kevin Durant was doing that, or someone that the media for some reason likes, they would be loud about it. I'm sorry, James Harden has been the best scorer in the league for the last 4 years now. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I know that his efficiency isn't where Kevin Durant's is, but if James Harden played with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson for 3 years, his efficiency would be insane too. James Harden, no one can guard him one-on-one. Tell me one defender in the league that you would like to guard him one-on-one. You maybe say Kawhi Leonard, but that's not a great matchup. Every single night, James Harden gets multiple players thrown at him. Look at the players he's played with in his career. Not a lot of people like Russell Westbrook because of playoff success. He brought Russell Westbrook into the second round of the playoffs, something Russ hasn't done since KD left himself. Also looking at other players around him, Trevor Ariza, what was he? He's been a journeyman. And then he got really valuable once he played with James Harden. You're looking at PJ Tucker, a guy who had been on the Raptors. Not a lot of people really knew about him. James Harden is the reason PJ Tucker has been successful in his career. James Harden not only carries the Rockets to the playoffs every single year since he's been there. They have the longest playoff streak in the NBA in the Western Conference, but he's done it with bad signings. They overpaid Dwight Howard. He's done it with injured players around him. Chris Paul and Clint Capella 2 seasons ago, I believe, missed 55 games together, and he still carried the Rockets to a top 4 seed that year. He's been the closest player to beat the Golden State Warriors, even when they had Kevin Durant, got to a Game 7, and they probably would have won if Chris Paul didn't get hurt again. He's a player that's been madly overrated because of playoff in success, even though, he's gotten to the Western Conference Finals with I mean, not a top 5, top 10 player around him. Kevin Durant, it took Steph Curry and Klay Thompson to help him win a championship. And if James Harden had those players, they would have won the championship too. I think it's kind of ridiculous that people are this low on James Harden.
Yeah, to go back to James Harden, I think when evaluating a superstar, we have to look at value created for others. And James Harden's one of the best at that. Like, we look at some of the players they had, like you had mentioned, the PJ Tuckers of the world. I mean, look at House. House would have never even been in the league. Macklemore was basically out of the league. And then he's played these guys into several contracts. So I think it's incredible who he's played with and who he's tried to elevate, because obviously Macklemore was not a good shooter. We also forget about Gerald Green's little stint there, earned him another contract. So just something to add on to that.
Right, yeah, like looking at his wings the past years have been Ariza, Daniil House, Gary Clark. Like, he doesn't, Austin Rivers. Those are the good players around him, and those 4 players are all playing for a total of $14 million this next season. They're all on minimums. And that was his role players around him. That's nothing. He has nothing around him.
Now, looking at Kawhi Leonard, a lot of people don't see Kawhi as the second best player in the world anymore. They might have thought that last year. But obviously, Kawhi Leonard adds value on the offensive end and the defensive end. When you watch Kawhi Leonard, yes, he is more stiff than these other superstars with the ball in his hands. But, man, when he can get to the mid-range in his certain spot in the mid-range, he is a lethal weapon.
Yeah, looking at Kawhi Leonard, I think you just nailed it there. I think he's the best mid-range scorer in the league, especially out of the pick and roll. He's got that one little 1 or 2 dribble pull-up jumper right in the mid-range going left or right. I think that's something that is really underrated. I think a lot of the best players in the league have a mid-range game. We saw that with Kevin Durant. I think Kevin Durant and him are the top 2 when it comes to mid-range scoring. I think that's something that could benefit James Harden as well come playoff time if he embraced a mid-range game more. I think Daryl Morey kind of wrecked him with that. But looking at Kawhi Leonard, too, on a night-to-night basis, if you need to stop at the end of the game out on the perimeter, you're going to pick this guy. I'm sorry, there's not another single player in the league that even compares to him on the defensive end of the floor when you need a single stop. And he's still doing that defensively as an offensive juggernaut. He's the Clippers' lead dog. He's going to be a guy. It's going to be interesting to see how Ty Lue uses him and Paul George together this year. I think Kawhi Leonard, I think the Clippers would be a little bit better if Kawhi Leonard shouldered a little bit less offensive load and they put the ball in Paul George's hands a little bit more and kind of had a more healthy balance between the two. Because we saw that one night in Minnesota where the two of them combined for, I believe, 88 points, which is kind of incredible. But I think Kawhi Leonard is the best two-way player in the league. He's a guy that can create his own shot, can get to the rim and finish. He's an underrated finisher around the rim. He's an underrated three-point shooter as well. He's a guy who, a lot of pull-ups from 3, and he connects on a lot of them. So I think that people that are, lower on him now are probably overreacting to a playoff series loss against the Denver Nuggets that Kawhi Leonard was still magnificent in.
Now, on number 1, LeBron James. Not a lot of people are going to argue with you on this one. Why is he 1?
He's just overall the most complete player, a guy that bought back in on defense this year. Isn't quite the defender that a player like Kawhi Leonard is at this point. He's 35 years old. You can't really blame him. He's going to be 36 on December 30th. But offensively, the guy's a machine. He is going to be a walking 27, 7, and 7 like he is every single year. A guy that has really improved as a shooter. I think his consistency, especially from deep. He can shoot it with range now, especially on dribble pull-ups. He's kind of a surprising shooter at this point of his career. Obviously, free throw struggles are still there. But, if you're nitpicking about free throws for the best player in the world, you're probably focusing on the wrong thing. And like you had mentioned about superstars making teammates better, LeBron James is the king at that. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is getting $13+ million a year. I don't think he's a $13 million plus player without LeBron James. You're looking at Anthony Davis had his best individual season and best team season because of LeBron James. And also we've seen it over time and time again. The Cleveland Cavaliers, once LeBron left, have resorted to nothingness. It took the Miami Heat 7 years to return to glory after LeBron's departure. And now you're looking at a restoration of the Los Angeles Lakers franchise. I think they're probably the favorites to repeat again, and it's all because of number 23.
Yep, absolutely. And thanks everybody for watching. Once again, please subscribe if you did enjoy this video. Please also like the video if you did enjoy. We look forward to pushing out more NBA content for you. Please let us know in the comment section below if we made some mistakes, because that very well could be. We would like to hear the differing opinions of our subscribers. So thanks again for watching, and have a great rest of your day.